She lived quietly at the edge of a small town, just a woman with dirt on her boots and a broken water tank on her roof. He was a wandering mechanic, no stranger to silence, no longer expecting much from life or from people. But when their paths crossed one dusty afternoon, something began to stir beneath the surface. Not loudly, not instantly, but deeply, and for good. What started with a simple act of kindness would soon lead to a season neither of them saw coming. And maybe, just maybe, it would change them both in ways they never imagined. If you believe in the power of second chances, of love that grows slowly but lasts forever, then this story was made for you. Take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single story that touches the heart and brings warmth to the soul. Now settle in. Let me tell you what happened. When he stopped to fix a simple woman's water tank, he fixed a simple woman's water tank, not knowing she owned the largest blueberry farm in the state. The phone rang just as Eli Cooper was tightening the last bolt on Mrs. Langley's kitchen faucet. He ignored it at first. He wasn't one to jump at every buzz like the city folks he'd left behind years ago. But when the same number flashed a second time, he straightened, wiped his hands on a rag, and answered with a low, cautious, "Cooper Repairs, son." The voice on the other end was female, calm but edged with urgency. "I'm sorry to bother you so late. My water tank's leaking badly. I tried calling around, but no one's picking up. Someone gave me your name in town." Eli glanced out the window. The evening sky had begun its slow descent into dusk, casting long shadows across the hills. He didn't normally take last-minute jobs, not anymore. Not since he moved to Willow Ridge to disappear quietly into a life of solitude and rusted bolts. But there was something in her voice, something tired yet graceful, that nudged him past his usual boundary. "How far out are you?" he asked. "Just past the ridgeline pines. Take the gravel road west. My mailbox says Thatcher. You'll see a gate." Eli paused. That was near the old Whitmore property. Land most folks in town thought had long gone quiet, but he'd heard whispers. Someone had returned. "I'll be there in 20, he said and hung up before he could change his mind. The drive out past the ridge was steeped in silence. No radio, just the hum of his old Ford truck and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. The road turned from gravel to dirt, then opened to a weathered iron gate with peeling white paint and a mailbox that did indeed read Thatcher. He pulled in slowly, the tires crunching over stones. Towering pines lined the drive like solemn sentinels. When the trees parted, he saw a small, cedar-shingled farmhouse tucked into the edge of the forest. The setting sun caught the rooftop, casting a warm amber glow across the clearing. It was quiet, peaceful, almost too peaceful. Then she stepped out onto the porch. She wore denim overalls over a faded cotton shirt, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. Her dark brown hair was loosely tied back, and there was a smudge of something, flour maybe, on her cheek. She didn't look like someone who owned much. She didn't look like someone who had anything to prove. But there was something about her posture, tall, calm, entirely unbothered by appearances, that held his gaze. "You must be Mr. Cooper," she said, offering a soft smile. "I'm Claire." He gave a small nod, grabbing his toolbox from the passenger seat. "You said it's the tank?" "Up on the roof," she said, motioning toward the side of the house. "It's old and I've done what I could, but I think it needs more than duct tape and a prayer now." He followed her around back. The place was old but well kept, clearly loved, and just beyond the clearing, he noticed rows of bushes stretching toward the horizon. Blueberry bushes, mature, healthy. But he didn't comment. Not yet. The tank was indeed in bad shape, rusted at the seams and dripping in 3 places. "You've been climbing up here yourself?" he asked as he surveyed the damage. Claire shrugged. "Somebody's got to. It's just me out here." Something about the way she said it, without bitterness, without self-pity, made him look at her again. She was younger than he expected, maybe mid-30s, but there was an old soul steadiness in her gaze. She handed him a flashlight and stepped back as he climbed up to the tank. The next hour passed in a blur of wrenching, sealing, and more rust than Eli would have liked. Claire stayed nearby, offering quiet conversation but never hovering. She asked about his work, but not too much. She didn't pry. She simply existed beside him in that soft, companionable way that made even silence feel like comfort. As the last patch sealed and the leak slowed to a stop, Eli climbed down, wiping sweat from his brow. "It'll hold for now," he said, "but this whole system's outdated. You'll need a better pressure valve before the dry weeks hit." Claire nodded, her gaze flickering up to the tank like it was an old friend she couldn't quite let go of. "Thank you, really. I wasn't sure anyone would come." "You're lucky I was in town," he said, then realized how gruff it sounded. "I mean, it's good timing." She smiled, the kind that reached her eyes. "I'll take good timing over good weather any day." Eli loaded his tools into the truck. Normally, this would be the part where he tipped his cap and drove off, but something in him hesitated. Maybe it was the way the pines swayed gently behind the house, or the quiet strength in Claire's demeanor. Maybe it was just the loneliness he wasn't ready to admit. "I don't charge extra for emergencies," he said, "but I wouldn't say no to a glass of cold tea if you've got it." Claire tilted her head, amused. "Sun brewed, with a hint of mint. Come on in." Inside, the house smelled like rosemary and old wood. There were books on every surface, stacked, leaned, lived in. A black and white photo of a man and woman in their 50s sat on the mantel. Her parents, he guessed. A single teacup sat on the windowsill. They sat at a small wooden table by the window. She poured 2 glasses of tea from a mason jar and set a plate of blueberry muffins between them. "Baked this morning," she said. "The blueberries are local." He took a bite. They were warm and sweet and tasted like summer. "I don't usually stick around," he admitted. "Most folks just want the fix, not the company." Claire looked at him, eyes steady. "Well, I'm not most folks." Eli smiled for the first time in weeks, and though neither of them knew it yet, something had shifted, softly, subtly, like the first breeze before a long-awaited storm. The next morning brought a rare drizzle to Willow Ridge, light, almost playful, enough to make the rooftops hiss and the leaves shimmer. Eli stood in his workshop, the scent of cedar and motor oil thick in the air. His hands were busy restoring the carburetor from a tractor engine, but his mind wasn't on the task. It kept circling back to the quiet house by the pines, and the woman with blueberry muffins and calm eyes. He wasn't one to dwell. Fix it, finish it, move on. That was his rhythm now. But something about Claire Thatcher lingered. Maybe it was the way she moved through silence like it was a language all her own, or the way she never once asked him about his past, even when he sat at her table longer than he should have. The thought was broken by a soft knock on the workshop's side door. No one ever used that door. When he opened it, Claire stood there in a raincoat 2 sizes too big and boots that had clearly seen a dozen muddy harvests. In her hands was a cardboard box with handles of rope. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, brushing damp strands from her forehead. "I brought something for your trouble yesterday." Eli blinked. "I told you, no extra charge." Claire smiled. "This isn't payment, it's thanks." She set the box on his workbench. Inside were 6 jars of homemade preserves, blueberry, strawberry, and what looked like peach ginger. Beneath them was a paper-wrapped bundle of sweet cornbread and a small envelope sealed with wax. "I make small batches," she said. "Sell a few to the farmer's market. Give the rest to neighbors. If you're staying in town, I figured you count as one." Eli ran a thumb over the jar lids. No store-bought labels, just handwritten tags and twine bows. "You didn't have to go to the trouble. You climbed onto a rusted rooftop during mosquito hour and didn't even complain," Claire said. It felt like the right kind of trouble. There it was again, that softness in her voice, like a breeze through tall grass. It caught him off guard. He gestured toward the bench stool. "You want coffee? It's not sun-brewed, but it's hot." She sat, adjusting the sleeves of her coat. "Only if it's strong enough to scare the rain back into the sky." They talked as the storm pattered outside. Claire didn't say much about herself, only that she'd lived in that house for 5 years and preferred soil under her nails to traffic lights in her face. Eli found himself offering more than he expected. Nothing too deep, just memories from his early years as a city engineer, the way Boston winters bit into your bones, the smell of steel when it heated too fast. But it was enough. "Why Willow Ridge?" she asked finally. He hesitated. Then, "Too many ghosts in the city. Too much noise. I figured if I was going to keep waking up every day, it might as well be to birds and pine needles." Claire didn't look away. "Fair enough. There was a pause filled with the sound of rain dancing on the tin roof. Then Claire stood. I should get back. The south rows flood easy when the creek rises. Eli raised a brow. You farm out there? Claire gave a vague shrug. Small operation, just enough to keep me tired and sane. She turned to go but paused at the door. Oh, and that pressure valve we talked about? I ordered one. It should arrive by Friday. If you're not too busy, I'd like you to install it. Eli nodded more quickly than he meant to. I'll come by. The rest of the week stretched out slow and gray. Eli tried to focus on his other jobs, but every time he passed the old road to the Thatcher place, he found his gaze drifting toward the gate. What kind of small operation needed pressure valves and backup tanks and a dozen well-kept blueberry rows tucked behind the tree line? There was more to Claire than her boots and jam jars. He didn't mind the mystery, but it did make him wonder, what exactly was she choosing to hide? Friday came with clear skies and the kind of sunlight that made the whole world look like a postcard. Eli drove back to Claire's, the new brass valve wrapped in canvas on his passenger seat. When he arrived, she was already on the roof, checking seals with a cautious step and a long-handled broom. He barked up at her, startled. Are you planning to fix it without me now? Claire looked down with a grin. I got impatient. He climbed up beside her. Together they worked in silence, hands brushing occasionally as they tightened and fitted and tested the line. When they were done, Claire handed him a glass of lemonade. You're not like most repairmen, she said, settling beside him on the porch step. I'm not like most things, Eli replied, watching the way the wind stirred the trees at the edge of the clearing. Claire followed his gaze. Do you ever miss the noise? He shook his head. I miss people sometimes, but not the kind that only call when they need something. She nodded slowly, as if understanding too well. I'm not one for big groups anymore either, she said. People get curious, and curiosity has a price. Eli glanced at her, but she didn't elaborate. Just sipped her drink and watched the sun begin its descent. The shadows of the pines stretched long across the field, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. But something unspoken had settled between them. A fragile thread of trust, forming knot by knot. A week passed, then another. The summer sun grew bolder, drying the earth and quickening everything it touched. Grass, creeks, even conversations in town. But up near the edge of the pines where the old Thatcher place stood, time moved differently, slower, quieter, and somehow more honest. Eli hadn't meant to make regular trips out there. At first it was just the valve. Then it was a request to look at a rattling generator behind the tool shed. A few days later, Claire asked him to check the irrigation lines near the east side of the property. Sorry to keep bothering you, she'd said that morning, wiping her hands on the thighs of her overalls. I'd asked someone else, but I think most of them are afraid of this place. Eli smirked. It's not the place they're afraid of. It's the woman who climbs roofs in thunderstorms. That made her laugh. Just a soft one, but real. And he liked the sound of it more than he wanted to admit. The generator repair took the better part of an afternoon. It was tucked behind a shed that seemed older than the house itself. Eli crouched beside the unit, wiping grime from its casing, while Claire stood a few feet away, pruning a thick line of wild blackberry brambles. Between the shed and the woods, Eli spotted something that made him pause. A path, not well-worn but deliberate, cutting through the underbrush and curving into the trees. Where's that lead? He asked, nodding toward it. Claire didn't look up. Just another part of the property. How big is it exactly? She clipped a thorny branch and tossed it into a wheelbarrow. Big enough to get lost in if you don't know where you're going. It wasn't evasive, not exactly, but it wasn't an answer either. He returned to the generator, pretending not to think about it, but the question kept tapping at the corners of his mind. Later that evening, after the job was done, and Claire had brought out lemonade again, this time with fresh mint, Eli lingered near the back porch, eyes scanning the treetops. Claire leaned against the railing beside him, her face tilted to the golden light. You always this curious? She asked without turning. Eli chuckled. I work with machines, Claire. If something hums when it shouldn't, I ask why. She nodded slowly. Some parts of this place are meant to stay quiet. That's all. He didn't push. He just sipped his drink and watched the sun melt behind the distant hills. But something had shifted, a whisper of a mystery, barely audible, but impossible to ignore. That weekend, Eli stopped by the farmer's market in town to pick up oil filters from a friend who ran a lawn equipment booth. As he passed the rows of tents and tables, he spotted a familiar shape: glass jars tied with twine, handwritten labels, and a neat arrangement of jam-stained linen. He slowed, squinting. There was no one behind the stand, just a wooden sign that read, "Thatcher's Table. Small batches, big heart." A teenage girl wearing an apron returned with a box of fresh muffins and began arranging them with practiced ease. Eli approached. "Is Claire around?" The girl looked up. "Oh, she doesn't work the booth. Just sends the goods." He picked up a jar of blueberry preserve, identical to the one Claire had given him. The label was neat, careful, professional in a humble sort of way. "Business doing well?" he asked casually. The girl grinned. "Are you kidding? She supplies half the restaurants up in Rockport now. She's a legend. Some folks say she used to run a fancy food company out west. Don't know if that's true, though." Eli raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He bought 2 jars and left with the same quiet expression he always wore. But his thoughts had started to churn. Claire Thatcher wasn't just a woman living off the land. The following Monday, Claire called again. This time it was her irrigation pump. "It's making a strange noise," she said, "like something stuck inside." When Eli arrived, she was in the field, sleeves rolled and face streaked with dust. She waved him over, then went right back to work, checking soil levels with a quiet focus that reminded him of engineers on a deadline. The pump was wedged between 2 long rows of mature blueberry bushes, their green leaves shimmering under the sun. There were at least a dozen rows, and they stretched far beyond what he had previously seen. Too far for just enough to keep me tired and sane. "Claire," he said finally, setting down his wrench, "this isn't a backyard garden." She straightened, her hair pulled back with a red bandana. Her eyes met his, calm, steady, but not surprised. "I didn't say it was." He paused. "Why the secrecy?" She sighed, brushed dirt from her palms. "Because people act differently when they know. They assume things, they treat you like something to gain from." Eli didn't answer immediately. He just looked around, at the fields, at the well-maintained infrastructure, at the quiet force behind it all. "You built this yourself?" She nodded. "I had help. But yes, after my parents passed, I came back, took the inheritance and poured it into the land. Not because I wanted to be known, just because I wanted to see something grow again." The vulnerability in her words caught him off guard. It was the first time he'd heard her say anything about her family, anything real. Eli squatted back down beside the pump, hands moving on instinct, but his mind was still with her. "You don't have to hide it from me," he said after a moment. Claire didn't respond, but as she walked past, her hand brushed his shoulder, not a touch for balance or by accident. A quiet thank you, unspoken but understood. The storm rolled in just after dusk. It started as a distant grumble, barely audible over the cicadas. But within minutes, the wind shifted, the air thickened, and the first drops spattered against Eli's windshield as he pulled into Claire's drive. She hadn't called him this time. No job, no faulty valve. He'd simply been on his way home from a repair job on the east end of town when he saw the heavy clouds curling over the ridge and felt an inexplicable pull toward the pines. He parked beside her truck. The porch light was on, casting a soft golden halo in the deepening gray. He climbed the steps, hesitated, and knocked. Claire opened the door barefoot, wearing a loose sweater and jeans, sleeves rolled, her hair damp and curling slightly from the humidity. She blinked in surprise but not displeasure. "Storm's coming," he said simply. She stepped aside. "I'd ask if you came to warn me, but I'm guessing you saw something else that needed fixing. Just checking you're not up on the roof again." Claire gave a faint smile. "Not tonight. Even I have limits." He followed her inside. The smell of something warm, maybe cinnamon and sage, welcomed him like a memory. A fire crackled in the old brick hearth, and on the coffee table sat 2 steaming mugs and a book of old botanical illustrations. "You were expecting someone?" he asked, nodding toward the mugs. "I always make 2. Habit," she said. "Sometimes I drink both." Thunder rumbled overhead, closer now. The lights flickered once, then steadied. "You want the left mug or the right?" she asked. "Left," he said, without knowing why. She handed it to him, then dropped into the armchair across from the couch where he sat. Outside, rain began to fall. Gentle at first, then steady, like a drum beat on the porch roof. They sipped in silence for a moment, watching shadows flicker along the walls. "This used to be my grandparents' house," Claire said finally. "They built it after the war. Every board, every nail. My father was born in the back room." Eli looked around. It felt lived in, but not worn. The kind of place where nothing matched but everything belonged. "They pass it on to you?" "My parents inherited it. When they died, it came to me. I couldn't stay here at first. Too many echoes. So I left. Spent a few years out west. Thought I'd start fresh." "And?" Claire tilted her head, eyes soft. "Turns out, the further you run from something rooted in love, the more hollow the new ground feels." Eli understood that too well. "My wife died 6 years ago," he said, the words quiet and sudden. "Car accident, a month after our 10th anniversary. Claire didn't speak. She just set her mug down gently. "I kept working for a while," he continued. "Engineering firm. Good people. But everything started feeling artificial. Meetings about budgets and timesheets while I was still figuring out how to microwave dinner without crying. So I sold the condo, bought a truck, and drove until I ran out of reasons not to." "And you landed here," she said. "Figured if I was going to feel like a ghost, I might as well haunt a peaceful place." They both chuckled softly, though neither laugh lasted long. The rain intensified, tapping steadily at the windows. Claire stood and crossed the room to a side cabinet. She returned with a wool blanket, draped it over the back of the couch beside Eli, and sat down. Not opposite him this time, but near. Not too near. Just near enough. "I don't talk about them much," she said after a moment. "My parents. They were good people. Salt-of-the-earth types. They taught me that hard work was its own kind of prayer. That kindness didn't need witnesses." "That's rare," he said. "They died just before harvest season. Plane crash. Coming back from visiting investors in Vermont. They didn't even like flying." Her voice thinned, but didn't tremble. "I was 29, engaged at the time. Thought I had everything figured out." Eli watched her, not interrupting. "When the estate transferred to me," she continued, "people started showing up. Lawyers, developers, old friends. Even my fiancé started seeing dollar signs instead of dinner plans. I broke it off the week before the wedding, packed everything, came back here, and started digging irrigation lines with my own 2 hands." Eli nodded slowly. "You rebuilt it alone." "I had a few good folks early on, but mostly, yes." She didn't say it like a badge of honor, just a fact, but the weight behind it was real. Eli took a breath. "Claire, why keep it all hidden? Because if people don't know what you have, they only see who you are. And if they do, they see the worth before the woman. I got tired of being a commodity." Lightning flashed silently outside. A moment later, thunder chased it. "You ever think of leaving again?" he asked. "Sometimes, but then I look around and this place doesn't ask anything of me. It just lets me be." They fell into silence again, but it wasn't empty. It was the kind of quiet that settles into old wood and warm fabric. The kind of quiet that lets two people sit beside one another and not feel alone. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, the house held steady. After a while, Claire rose to check the windows, pulling them closed one by one. "You're welcome to stay until it lets up," she said, not looking at him. Eli didn't move right away. He just nodded, finished the last of his tea, and stretched his legs as if he belonged. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about what was broken. He was thinking about what might be beginning. The Willow Ridge Summer Fair arrived with the kind of soft fanfare that small towns did best. Hand-painted signs, pie contests, and twinkle lights strung between light poles like threads of gold. It was a tradition older than anyone could remember, stitched into the fabric of the town like an heirloom quilt. Claire hadn't attended in years, not since she came back to the farm and chose a life behind fences and rows. But this time, she accepted the invitation, more out of curiosity than anything else. Eli was the one who asked her. They had been loading old piping into the back of his truck after a long afternoon repairing her western irrigation line when he glanced over and said, "You ever go to the fair?" Claire had looked up, surprised. "Used to. My dad entered his blueberry crumble 5 years in a row. Never won." Eli smirked. Tragedy. I bet the judges were paid off. She laughed, then looked away as if she hadn't meant to. There's music, he said. People. Food. I'm not trying to make a thing of it. Just figured maybe it's time you let the town remember your face. Claire hesitated, and then, as if surprising herself, she nodded. Okay, I'll go. Saturday evening brought clear skies and a soft summer breeze. Claire stood in front of her mirror, smoothing a pale linen blouse over her jeans. She hadn't worn makeup in years and saw no reason to start now. Her hair was tied back simply, and she wore a pendant her mother had given her when she was 16, worn brass, shaped like a blueberry leaf. When Eli pulled up in his truck, he didn't say much, just gave her a quiet smile. He'd changed too. Clean jeans, a crisp shirt, hair combed back. He looked, she thought, like someone trying not to look like he was trying. It suited him. They drove with the windows down, country music humming low on the radio. Neither spoke much, but the silence felt companionable, like the pauses between heartbeats. The fairgrounds buzzed with life. Kids darted between booths, older couples swayed to a fiddle tune under strings of light, and the air smelled of kettle corn and fresh hay. Claire followed Eli through the crowd, fielding a few surprised greetings from neighbors she hadn't seen in years. "Claire Thatcher?" one woman gasped, holding a pie tin. "Well, I'll be. We thought you'd disappeared." Claire smiled, nodding politely. "Just busy with the land." Most didn't press. Some looked toward Eli curiously, and a few cast knowing glances as they passed. But Claire kept walking, her gaze steady, her expression calm. They ended up at a small table beneath a maple tree strung with lanterns. Eli set down 2 lemonades and a paper tray of fried green tomatoes. "Still think this was a bad idea?" he asked. Claire shook her head. "No, just strange. Like stepping into a dream you forgot you had." He didn't press further. Instead, he passed her a tomato, and they ate in silence, watching the crowd swirl around them. After a while, a local band began to play an old country tune, slow and sweet, with a melody that wrapped around your chest. Couples took to the makeshift dance floor. Claire watched them, the sway, the rhythm, the quiet intimacy of it. She hadn't danced since. She felt a hand reach across the table. Eli didn't say anything. He just offered his hand. Claire looked at it, then at him. His face was open, patient, waiting, not demanding, not assuming. She set down her drink. "I haven't danced in years," she said. "Neither have I," he replied. "But I figure we can't be worse than the couple doing the foxtrot to a waltz." She smiled, stood, and placed her hand in his. The first few steps were hesitant. Her hand rested lightly on his shoulder, his settled gently at her waist. They moved slowly, letting the music carry them. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was easy. As the song went on, Claire began to relax. Her body remembered this way of moving with someone, not just beside them, but with them. She caught his eyes once, and there was something in them, quiet admiration, not for her face or figure, but for something deeper. Her resilience, maybe, her presence. The song ended, but they didn't move. Another began, softer, gentler. They stayed where they were, swaying beneath the lights. And for a moment, the years between her past and this present folded like pages of a book. Later, they sat again beneath the maple tree, the crowd beginning to thin. Claire leaned back, looking up at the stars emerging above the fairground haze. "I don't usually let people pull me out of hiding," she said. Eli leaned beside her. "I don't usually ask." They exchanged a glance, simple, sincere. Then Claire turned to him and said something she hadn't said to anyone in a long time. "Thank you." He didn't ask why. He just nodded, finished the last of his lemonade, and said, "You're welcome." As they walked back to the truck, the distant sound of the band trailed behind them. Claire glanced back once, not to check for attention, but to remember, to hold it. Not the fare, not the music, the feeling. And she realized as the truck rumbled to life and Eli drove them into the night, that something had begun to bloom inside her. Not loudly, not suddenly, but undeniably. Eli hadn't intended to pass by Claire's place that night. He was returning late from a generator job up near Baxter's Hill, and the winding route home took him close enough that her gate came into view through his windshield. It was past 11. The roads were empty. The moon hung low, filtered through the haze of late summer heat, but something felt off. There were headlights cutting through the tree line, brighter than any porch lamp. He slowed instinctively, easing his truck to the side of the gravel road, engine low. A white box truck sat halfway down Claire's drive, idling near the edge of the clearing. No logos, no company name, just plain, clean panels and two men in reflective vests unloading metal crates. Eli's pulse ticked up. It wasn't the hour that bothered him, it was the familiarity. He'd worked years in logistics. He knew the way commercial cold storage trucks looked, the kind used to transport fresh produce to high-end retailers or processing hubs. He also knew they didn't show up in the dead of night without purpose. He shut off his engine, got out, and walked toward the tree line bordering Claire's property. The pines were thick here, and the undergrowth muffled his steps. He moved quietly, not sure why, but certain he didn't want to be seen. Not yet. From the shadows he watched as the workers, 4 now, wheeled out sealed bins and loading pallets. They moved with practiced efficiency, guided by the faint glow of handheld flashlights and murmured instructions. A few yards beyond the truck, Claire appeared. She wore a jacket over her flannel nightshirt and carried a clipboard. Her face was focused, all business. No sign of surprise, no discomfort. Eli's breath caught. She wasn't being targeted. She was directing them. One of the men handed her a tablet. She signed with a swift stroke and nodded toward a narrow gravel path winding deeper into the property. The truck followed slowly, disappearing into the woods. Eli stood frozen. He didn't know what exactly he had just witnessed, but it wasn't the routine of a small-time homesteader moving jam jars and muffins to the Saturday market. This was organized, large-scale, quietly controlled, and hidden. He walked back to his truck, climbed in, and sat with both hands on the wheel for a long moment. His stomach churned, not with anger, not yet, just a low burn of disquiet. She had lied to him, or no, she had omitted, carefully, repeatedly. And while he couldn't yet say why it mattered so much, it did. The next morning, Claire called. "Hey," she said casually, like nothing had happened. "The main cooler's acting up. Compressor's making a strange buzz. You around?" Eli stared at the phone. He could lie, say he was busy, say he was out of town. But that wasn't who he was. He arrived just after 9. Claire greeted him with her usual calm smile and a cup of coffee, as though she hadn't orchestrated a clandestine operation mere hours ago. "The unit's around back," she said. "I shut it off overnight. Figured you'd want to hear the noise fresh." Eli followed her through the orchard path in silence. His boots crunched over gravel. The sun filtered through the trees, warm and golden, but his chest felt hollow. "You've got a lot going on back here," he said evenly. Claire glanced over her shoulder. "I keep busy." "You move product at midnight often?" She stopped, slowly turned. "I saw the truck," he said. "Last night. Saw you." Claire didn't flinch, but her shoulders drew tighter, her jaw stiffened. She let out a quiet breath. "I didn't mean for you to find out like that." "Why not?" Eli asked. "Why not just tell me?" "Because once people know," she said quietly, "they stop seeing me. They see numbers. They see opportunity. Or they see threat." He shook his head. "Claire, I've eaten muffins at your kitchen table. I've climbed your roof in a storm. You think I care about how many crates you ship?" She didn't speak. Eli softened. "I just don't understand why you needed to hide it from me." Claire crossed her arms, eyes steady but clouded. "Because this, what I've built, it's taken everything, and I'm proud of it. But it's not who I am, not entirely. And I wanted you to meet the woman who digs trenches and burns her toast, not the name on a business license." He studied her, trying to match the woman before him with the one from the fair, the one who danced under the maple tree and watched stars like they held answers. "Was any of it real?" he asked quietly. Her face cracked then, just a little. All of it was real. The honesty in her voice struck him like thunder. Not loud, but undeniable. "I'll fix the cooler," he said after a pause. "Then I think I need some space." Claire gave a small nod, then turned without another word. Eli worked in silence, his mind churning as he replaced the compressor. His hands moved on instinct, but his thoughts felt tangled. Trust, pride, disappointment, and something deeper he didn't want to name. When he was done, he left his invoice unsigned, tucked beneath a jar of peach ginger preserve on the porch step. No note, no goodbye, just silence. That night, Claire stood at her window, looking out at the darkened fields. The wind moved through the blueberry rows like a whisper, and somewhere deep in her chest, something ached. She had told herself for years that love, if it ever came again, would have to come without conditions. But maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe it had to come with honesty first. The morning after Eli walked away, the blueberry rows stood quiet under a hazy sky. The coolers hummed, the workers moved between rows with practiced rhythm, and shipments rolled down the gravel path toward the highway. But inside the old farmhouse, time stalled. Claire sat at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee and the jar of peach ginger preserve still sitting on the counter, unopened, just as he'd left it. She had known it was a risk. Letting him into her world, even just the outer shell of it, had been a choice made with care. And still, it hadn't been enough. Or maybe it had been too much. She wasn't sure anymore. For the past 5 years, Claire had built a fortress, not of walls, but of silences, of polite deflections and partial truths. She wasn't ashamed of what she'd accomplished. She was proud of it. But pride had its cost, and it rarely came with companionship. She thought of Eli's eyes when he asked, "Was any of it real?" It was all real, but reality doesn't always come with perfect timing or perfect explanations. And now she wasn't sure if there was a way to reach him again. Eli, for his part, didn't drive past the Thatcher place for 5 days. He kept himself busy. The kind of busy that filled your hands but emptied your head. He serviced a couple of tractors up by Bailey Creek, rewired the lights in the town's post office, and took on 2 appliance repairs he would normally refer to someone else. Still, Claire lingered in his mind like the scent of sawdust after a storm, earthy, sharp, and impossible to forget. He hadn't left because of what she built. He left because she hadn't trusted him with it, and now he wasn't sure if that said more about her or about him. By Friday, the rhythm of the week had begun to dull. The work was done, but nothing in him felt settled. The thought of her walking those rows alone, managing that much weight with no one at her side, it gnawed at him. He thought back to that night on her porch, the wool blanket, the rain on the windows, the way her voice softened when she talked about her parents. That had been the realest thing he'd felt in years, and now it hovered between them like unfinished music. He told himself space would give him clarity. All it had done was remind him how much she mattered. That evening, Eli walked into the Willow Ridge General Store to pick up a replacement belt for his sander. As he waited at the register, he overheard 2 women chatting by the canned goods aisle. "I still can't believe it," one of them said. "Thatcher's behind all that produce going to the resort in Rockport? Quiet as a mouse, that one." "She's been funding the school garden, too," the other replied. Anonymously. Principal said he got a check last month. No name, just a note that said, "For the kids who get their hands dirty." Eli turned slowly. They weren't gossiping. They were in awe. And somehow that did more to shake his frustration than anything else could have. Claire hadn't built a kingdom to hide in. She'd built a life and guarded it because the world had already taken too much from her. That night, Eli sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee and the worn envelope Claire had given him weeks ago, the one with the handwritten note and the first jars of jam. He hadn't opened it. It had felt too personal back then, too early. Now it felt like a lifeline. Inside was a folded sheet of stationery. One short sentence was written in ink that had pressed a little too hard into the page. "Some things are worth fixing more than once." He stared at it for a long time. Then he stood, grabbed his jacket, and got in the truck. Claire was on the porch when he arrived, not waiting, just sitting, barefoot, with a book open in her lap and a lantern glowing beside her. She looked up when she heard the engine, and for a moment, she didn't move. Eli stepped out of the truck and stood at the bottom of the steps, hands in his pockets. "I came to return something," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You didn't borrow anything." He pulled the note from his jacket pocket and held it out. Claire rose, walked down the steps, and took it. "You read it?" she asked. "Finally." A pause, long, not uncomfortable, just full of all the words neither had said. "I'm sorry," she said at last. "I should have told you the truth sooner." He shook his head. "You didn't owe me anything, Claire. But I was starting to think. Maybe we were building something. And it's hard to build anything on top of secrets." I wasn't hiding because I was ashamed, she said softly. I was hiding because I was tired of being measured by what I own. I wanted you to see me first. I did, Eli said. That's why I stayed, and why I left. Claire looked down at the note in her hand. I don't expect you to just pick up where we left off, she said. But if there's a chance, I'd like to start from somewhere honest. Eli nodded slowly. I don't need to know all your numbers. I just need to know where I stand. She met his eyes. Beside me, if you want to. He took the last step forward. And then, without a grand gesture or a perfect line, he reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. The work didn't stop. Blueberries didn't care if a heart was healing or breaking. They ripened under the sun all the same, needed pruning all the same, and shipped whether Claire had slept or not. The workers moved as they always had, efficient, polite, and a little unsure of how close to stand. Most of them had grown used to Eli's quiet comings and goings. He had become, if not part of the crew, then a dependable rhythm in the background, a fixture, and now he was gone again. Claire didn't tell them why. She didn't tell herself either. Some truths didn't need retelling. They just needed living through. It had been nearly a week since they stood on the porch, fingers brushing in the dark. He hadn't said he was back. He hadn't said much at all. But he came. Not all at once. Not through the front gate. At first it was just his truck, parked down the lane by the western fence. Then a morning where the pump shed door, once stuck, had been oiled and realigned. Then another day when the east irrigation panel, which had been giving odd pressure readings, suddenly displayed a clean, even flow. Claire never saw him at work. He came early or late, always quiet, always gone before she could say anything. But his touch was unmistakable, precise, measured, kind. And little by little, the farm began to breathe easier again. One morning as Claire walked the southern rows with a clipboard and sun hat, she noticed a pair of red-handled pruning shears sitting on a stump near the first trellis. They were old, the paint chipped from use, but they were his. Wrapped around the handle was a note scrawled in Eli's firm hand. In case your other tools are still stubborn. She read it twice, then smiled, just a little. That afternoon she found herself baking. It wasn't conscious, just habit maybe, or hope. She pulled flour and sugar from the tall cupboard, found the last of the frozen blueberries from last year's harvest, and began folding ingredients into the worn mixing bowl that had belonged to her mother. By the time the sun dropped low, the kitchen smelled like summer again. Warm fruit and vanilla. She sliced the bars, wrapped them in parchment, and tucked them into a paper sack with a ribbon of twine. The next morning she drove out to the far tool shed, where Eli had been replacing a section of copper piping that had rusted from the inside out. She knew he'd be there. She left the bag on the workbench, said nothing, just turned and walked away. That evening, Eli stood alone by the edge of the blueberry rows. The sun dipped low behind the pines, casting long golden rays across the farm. In his hand, he held one of the bars, half-eaten. They tasted like forgiveness, or something close to it. He wasn't rushing back in. He wasn't ready to pick up where they left off, because the truth was, they hadn't left off. They'd paused, hesitated, stumbled at a truth neither knew how to carry. But they were still facing the same direction now. And that was something. Claire saw him again, really saw him. 2 days later when the main water line cracked just below the back fence. She was already covered in dust and sweat, sleeves rolled, boots sunk in mud when he pulled up beside her without a word. He walked to the open trench, glanced at the exposed pipe and crouched. You brought the right wrench? She asked. He held it up. They worked side by side in silence, passing tools, brushing elbows, sweat beading on their brows. When the final seal clicked into place and the water resumed its steady hum, Claire sat back in the grass and sighed. You didn't have to come. Eli shrugged, eyes fixed on the freshly repaired line. Pipes don't care about past mistakes. She smiled faintly. People do. He looked over at her then, really looked. Her hair was plastered to her neck, her hands were caked in red clay, and she looked more beautiful than he remembered, because she wasn't performing anything. She was just her. I'm not angry anymore, he said. Claire didn't answer right away. Then, I didn't know how to tell you what I hadn't told anyone else. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted so badly for it to be just us, without everything else. Eli nodded. That's the problem with fences. They keep things out, but sometimes they keep good things from getting in. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. It was the same soft cream paper she used for her jam labels. She placed it on the grass beside him. What's this? He asked. Blueprints. For what? She stood and brushed off her pants. For trust. If you're still interested. He looked down, then up. I am. Claire extended a hand. He took it. Not to stand. Not yet. Just to hold. That night as he drove home, Eli didn't feel the usual ache in his chest. The silence in the truck felt different. Not empty, but open. He knew there was still work ahead. Emotional, practical, maybe even painful. But it wasn't hopeless anymore. It was a beginning. And beginnings, as he'd learned out here in the middle of nowhere, often arrived without trumpets or speeches. Sometimes they just showed up with a wrench in one hand and blueberry bars in the other. The mornings had changed. Claire noticed it first in the quiet moments before dawn, when the farmhouse was still and the sky outside her kitchen window glowed faintly with coming light. The air smelled of wet soil and ripening fruit, and the silence no longer felt so sharp. It had softened into something else, something waiting. Eli hadn't come by in 2 days, not because anything was wrong. If anything, it was the opposite. Since the trench repair, he had let space settle between them, like a craftsman waiting for cement to cure before building again. But Claire felt the difference in her bones. The ache of absence had been replaced by the steady hum of anticipation. She reached into the cupboard and pulled down the same teacup she always used, the pale blue one with the tiny chip on the rim. It had been her mother's. The flaw made it hers. She poured the tea slowly, the scent of dried mint and lemon balm filling the air. Then she took a deep breath, walked to her writing desk, and penned 7 words on a sheet of ivory paper. If you haven't closed the door yet. She folded the note once, gently, like a secret, and slid it beneath the teacup on the porch table, right beside where Eli used to sit. Then she waited. Not outside, not by the window, but in the kitchen, hands deep in a mixing bowl, trusting that the gesture would be found if it was meant to be. Eli was halfway through changing the oil in his truck when he found himself staring at the trees lining the north road. His wrench paused mid-turn, his hands stilled. There wasn't any logical reason for him to drive out to Claire's that morning. No job, no appointment, no excuse. But logic, he'd come to understand, didn't account for longing. And longing wasn't something that could be scheduled. He arrived mid-morning, gravel crunching softly under his tires as he pulled to a stop beside the old porch. The sun was climbing, warm but not yet harsh. He stepped out of the truck and stood for a moment, letting the stillness of the place wash over him. Then he saw it, the teacup, sitting alone on the wooden table, its chipped rim facing outward like a silent invitation. He stepped forward, heart thudding with a strange mixture of nerves and something dangerously close to hope. He lifted the cup. There, folded beneath it, was her note. 7 words, no signature, no embellishment. But it might as well have been a key. He tucked the note into his jacket, sat down in the chair beside the cup, and waited. Claire didn't come out right away. He heard the faint sound of music playing in the kitchen. Something old and instrumental, the kind of song that felt more like a memory than a melody. Eventually, the door creaked open. She stepped out with flour on her hands, an apron tied at her waist, and her hair pulled back in a loose braid that revealed the slope of her neck. "You got my message," she said simply. Eli held up the note. It was hard to miss. She smiled, shy but genuine. "I didn't know if you'd come." "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But then I remembered something." "What's that?" "You don't build something worth keeping by walking away from it every time it gets hard." Claire looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I didn't mean to make it hard." He stood slowly. "You didn't. Life did. We just met in the middle of it." She crossed her arms loosely. "So now what?" Eli took a step closer. "Now, maybe, we start again. No fences, no secrets, just tea and jam and time." Claire studied him. "I don't need grand declarations." "Good," he said. "I left all those in Boston." That made her laugh, soft and low. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old receipt from the first job he ever did for her. The one with a coffee stain on the corner and a penciled note that read, "No charge, just tea next time." He handed it to her. "I think it's time you cash this in." Claire took it with careful fingers. "I might frame it." He smiled. "You do that, but I still want the tea." They sat on the porch for hours, talking, not everything, not yet, but enough. Eli told her about his father, an old welder from Vermont who taught him to listen for the rhythm in machines. Claire told him about the summer her mother taught her to graft blueberry branches while humming Patsy Cline songs in the shade. They swapped stories between sips, letting the hours unfold like petals. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt the need to rush. When the sun began to dip and the shadows stretched long across the fields, Claire reached for his hand, not out of fear, not to pull him in, just to hold, like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night, Eli sat on his porch, looking out at the stars above Willow Ridge, the same stars that had watched him mourn, watched him build, watched him run. Now they watched him come home, not to a place, but to a person. It started with the bakery sign. On a bright Monday morning, 2 days after Claire and Eli sat on her porch and folded their lives a little closer together, the Willow Ridge Bakery posted a photo on their community board. 3 rows of golden scones, each one bursting with fresh blueberries. The caption read, "New supplier, biggest, freshest, juiciest blueberries we've ever had, thanks to Thatcher Estates." The name struck people like a dropped fork in a quiet diner. Thatcher? As in Claire Thatcher? By lunchtime, word had spread from the bakery to the barber shop, to the gas station, to the coffee counter in the general store. By mid-afternoon, Claire's name, quiet, steady Claire, was being spoken more than it had in the past 5 years combined. Some were shocked, some were amused, a few were offended they hadn't known, but most were impressed. Claire hadn't planned the reveal. The bakery had simply asked if they could credit the farm. Business had been booming since switching to her fruit. She'd hesitated, then nodded. Maybe it was time. Maybe hiding had served its purpose. She walked into town the next day wearing jeans and a pressed white shirt, hair neatly pinned back. Her boots were still dusty, her face still free of makeup, but her spine was straighter than it had been in years. She dropped off 2 crates at the market, then stopped by the hardware store to replace a broken faucet knob. She didn't hurry. She didn't avoid. People stared, but they didn't whisper. Eli was already at the edge of Main Street, waiting by his truck. He'd offered to come with her. She'd said no, but he'd come anyway, just in case. When she saw him, leaning against the driver's side with one boot crossed over the other, a thermos in hand, she smiled. "You didn't have to hover," she said as she approached. He handed her the thermos. "It's not hovering. It's standing nearby in case you get tired of answering questions." She took a sip. It was black coffee with just the right amount of honey. How she liked it. "I only had to explain myself twice," she said, "and neither time did anyone accuse me of being a Bond villain." Eli smirked. "Then I'd call it a win." That afternoon, they sat together outside the market, under the awning where old men usually played checkers. No one asked them to move. In fact, a few people nodded, waved, even stopped to say hello. Sheriff Marsh strolled by with a paper bag of peaches and tipped his hat. "You've been hiding that farm of yours like a magician's card trick, Miss Thatcher." Claire nodded politely. "Sometimes the best tricks take time." "Well," he said, adjusting his belt, "if you've got any of those blueberries left, my wife's making pie for the church auction. You'd be doing the Lord's work." She laughed. "Drop by tomorrow. I'll set some aside." The sheriff walked off, whistling. Claire looked over at Eli. "This wasn't as awful as I expected." "You gave them the version of you they were never ready to imagine," he said, "but you didn't change who you were. That's the difference." She glanced down at her hands. "It still feels strange, like stepping out of a long shadow and realizing the sun's been waiting the whole time." Eli reached for her hand beneath the table. His grip was warm, reassuring. "Then take your time getting used to the light." Over the next few days, things shifted. Subtly, but unmistakably. People came to the farm. Neighbors, not strangers. They brought pie dishes to return, and borrowed ladders, and questions about composting and drip irrigation. And Claire welcomed them. She didn't give tours. She didn't host events. She didn't suddenly turn her private acres into a brand. But she stopped pretending she wasn't at the center of something remarkable. And in doing so, she made it feel reachable. Eli became a more permanent fixture, sometimes in her field, sometimes in her kitchen. He never pressed, never demanded. He fixed what needed fixing and stayed quiet through the moments that asked for quiet. At night, they sat on the porch and watched the sky change. One evening, as fireflies blinked in the tall grass, Claire turned to him. "I used to think being alone was safer." He waited. "But lately, it feels like being seen might be a kind of safety too." Eli didn't answer with words. He just reached for her hand and held it like he meant it. One morning, a week later, Claire stood outside her cooler shed with a clipboard in hand and her boots already dusted from a sunrise walk. Eli arrived early, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a small paper bag in the other. "What's that?" she asked, nodding to the bag. He handed it to her. "Figured if I'm helping with the loading today, I should bring breakfast." She opened it and blinked. Inside was a single blueberry muffin, not one of hers. Store-bought, slightly overbaked, wrapped in napkin. Claire raised an eyebrow. "It's symbolic," he said, straight-faced. "Of what?" He sipped his coffee. "Of how lucky I am that you're the one baking now." She laughed, a full, beautiful laugh that echoed through the field. And for the first time in a long, long time, she felt like all the pieces of her life, wild, scarred, beautiful, had finally come into place. The morning of the Blueberry Festival dawned with skies the color of ripe fruit, deep and cloudless, a rare gift in mid-August. Willow Ridge came alive early that day. Children darted through rows of white tents. The scent of baked goods and sun-warmed berries filled the air, and locals pulled their best denim from closets, brushed the dust from lawn chairs, and gathered under fluttering bunting to celebrate the harvest that defined their region. Claire had never spoken publicly at the festival. For years, she'd watched it from the distance of her porch, sometimes listening to the music float over the hills. She'd donated anonymously, sent crates of berries under other names, and quietly ensured the school's booth always had more than enough. But today, she'd said yes. The festival committee had invited her to speak after learning, somewhat belatedly, that their largest produce contributor wasn't a faceless farm or faraway company, but the woman who still drove her own truck and baked her own scones. She hadn't told Eli until the day before. "I'm going to stand on that stage and say it out loud," she said, pulling weeds from the base of a trellis. "Not for attention, just because it's time." He had only nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "You won't be standing alone." The town square pulsed with music and laughter by the time Claire arrived. She wore a cotton dress the color of faded chamomile and a wide-brimmed hat she hadn't worn in years. Her boots were still on her feet. She wasn't giving those up for anything. Eli walked beside her in a clean shirt and jeans, hair trimmed, expression calm. He carried a small, rusted object in his hands, hidden in a brown bag. Claire glanced at it. "What's that?" "A visual aid," he said. "You'll see." They stood near the stage as the mayor gave his usual opening remarks, thanking the volunteers, the sponsors, the pie judges. Then, with a slightly sheepish smile, he motioned to Claire. "I think many of us have known the name Thatcher for a long time," he said. "What some of us didn't know, myself included, is that the woman responsible for more than half the fruit we've eaten this summer has been working right under our noses. Claire, would you come up here?" Applause broke out, tentative at first, then steady. Claire stepped up slowly. She didn't rush, didn't hide. She took the microphone in both hands and scanned the crowd, not looking for approval, but for familiarity. She found it. In the bakery owner, in the school teacher, in the couple who used to sell hay to her father, and in Eli standing just beyond the edge of the stage, hands in his pockets now, eyes locked on her with quiet steadiness. "Hi," she said, her voice sure despite the crackle of the mic. "I'm Claire Thatcher. Some of you know me as the girl who used to ride her bike into town for lemonade and library books. Some of you haven't seen me at all." A chuckle rippled through the crowd. "I've spent the last few years rebuilding my family's farm. Not for recognition, not for business, but because I couldn't imagine letting something my parents loved so much fade away." She paused, adjusting the mic slightly. "When I came back, I was grieving, and I thought the best way to survive was to disappear behind work. Hard work. Long days, no questions." The crowd had grown still. But then someone showed up at my gate with a toolbox and no idea who I was, and he fixed my water tank without asking for more than a glass of tea. And slowly, I began to realize that healing doesn't come from hiding. It comes from letting yourself be seen, even in the messy parts. Eli's throat tightened. Claire continued, I'm proud of the land I run, proud of every crate we pack, every jam jar we label. But more than that, I'm proud to be part of a town where people still wave to each other on back roads and show up for strangers just because it's the right thing to do. She glanced off stage. Eli stepped forward, holding out the brown bag. She took it, pulled out the old rusted water valve, the one he'd fixed on the roof of her house the day they met. She held it up. This was the first thing I thought I needed fixed when he showed up, she said with a soft smile. Turns out, there was something else leaking more quietly, something inside me, and kindness. Kindness has a way of sealing the cracks, even if you don't know they're there. The crowd was silent. Then applause began, genuine, full, sustained. She stepped down from the stage, the valve still in her hands, and walked directly into Eli's arms. He didn't care who was watching, neither did she. They spent the rest of the afternoon like everyone else, eating too many berry turnovers, dancing on the edge of rhythm, laughing with old friends and new. Claire moved through the crowd with ease now, no longer shrinking, no longer carrying her legacy like a burden. It had become a gift, and Eli, always one step behind or beside, didn't try to lead. He just stayed. At sundown, they sat on a bench beneath the giant sycamore tree near the bandstand. The air was cooler now, the lights flickering on above them. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder. Did I say too much? She asked. Not a word too many. They sat like that for a long time, the rusted valve resting between them on the bench. A reminder of beginnings, of quiet acts that change everything. Autumn came slowly to Willow Ridge. The leaves didn't burst into flame overnight. They turned in whispers, first gold at the edges, then orange, then the deep rust of ripened memory. The days grew cooler, the mornings misted and still, and the scent of wood smoke began to wind its way through the hills. Claire loved this time of year. It was the breathing space between seasons, the pause before winter when everything softened and settled. The fields had been harvested, the berries stored or sold. Her crew had dwindled to a few year-round hands, and the pace of the farm had relaxed into something almost meditative. And for the first time in years, she wasn't moving through it alone. Eli had become part of the landscape, not like a fixture or a shadow, but like a porch light that quietly came on before the sunset. He helped her install new lines before the first frost, replaced worn seals, and redesigned the aging greenhouse frame without being asked. They didn't label what they were. They didn't have to. Most evenings, they shared dinner on the porch, wrapped in old quilts, feet propped on the railing. Sometimes they talked about repairs or recipes or whether the old fig tree could be saved. Other times, they just sat, letting the silence between them speak its own kind of comfort. One such evening, as the first leaves fell onto the porch steps, Claire handed him a warm mug of tea. It was the same chipped teacup she'd once used to leave him a note. He took it without a word, smiled, and looked out over the dusky hills. You ever think, he said softly, how something as small as a broken tank brought us here? Claire glanced at him. It wasn't the tank. He raised an eyebrow. She sipped her own tea, the steam curling around her smile. It was the man who showed up to fix it without asking who I was. Eli didn't respond right away. He just nodded once, then reached into the pocket of his jacket. From it, he pulled a small box. Nothing fancy, not velvet, just wood, carved smooth with care. Claire's breath caught slightly, though she said nothing. He opened it slowly and revealed a ring. Not flashy, not large. A simple band of silver with a tiny stone the color of fresh blueberries. I don't need a ceremony, he said, voice low, or a big crowd. I just need you, and a roof that doesn't leak. Claire laughed, but her eyes were wet. He held the ring a little higher. I want to stay, build something permanent, grow something that isn't just fruit or fences. She looked at him, her heart full in a way she hadn't expected or even dared hope for. And then she nodded. Yes, she whispered. Absolutely, yes. They married under the fig tree. It wasn't blooming, not in October, but the leaves had turned a deep amber, and the branches arched like a cathedral. Only a dozen guests attended, The bakery owner, the school principal, the two oldest farmhands, and Sheriff Marsh, who performed the ceremony with a solemnity that made Claire grin through her tears. Eli wore his best flannel and a boutonniere made of rosemary and wild blueberries. Claire wore boots beneath her dress and carried a bouquet wrapped in her mother's apron string. Afterward, they served pie instead of cake and danced barefoot in the grass to a fiddle and guitar duo that played off-key in the best way. When the sun dipped low, they lit lanterns and watched them rise into the darkening sky, small golden orbs drifting like fireflies into the future. Weeks passed. The chill deepened. Life continued, not with fanfare, but with joy in the little things. One morning, Claire walked into the workshop Eli had converted from an old storage shed. On the wall beside his blueprints and wrenches, she noticed something new, a photo, framed and simple. It was a picture of the farmhouse from that first day, the old tank just visible on the roof. Her standing in the doorway, with one hand raised to block the sun. She touched the frame lightly. "You kept it," she said. Eli looked up from the bench, wiping oil from his hands. "Reminds me where it all started," she smiled. "You know, I never replaced that tank." He walked over, placed a kiss on her forehead. "You didn't have to." Later that day, Claire stood at the edge of the blueberry rows, now bare and leafless, the soil resting. She thought of her parents, of all the seasons they had watched from this very spot. She thought of the weight she'd once carried alone, the silence she once wore like armor, and she thought of the man who had come not to rescue her, but to see her, to meet her in the middle of her hard-earned world and stay, not because of what she owned, but because of who she was beneath the quiet. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Then a familiar hand found hers. Together they stood there, letting the wind move through the empty branches, letting the land exhale. And when Claire looked ahead, she saw not just the resting fields. She saw every season yet to come. We hope this story touched your heart as much as it touched ours. Now we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. It's always a joy to see how far these stories reach around the world. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We share new, uplifting stories every week. Stories about love, kindness, and the quiet moments that change everything. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, take care and keep believing in the power of simple goodness.